That got it. Son of a... Hold on. Oh, just about got that weld smooth. Hold on. Ow! God damn. I hate this car. Had an absolute enough. Get not stuck. Oh. Oh, hey. Sorry. Sometimes things get a little bit out of hand under there. Whew. All right. Hold on. Clean up a little bit. Oh, all right. Well, yeah. I'm not going to let you see what tools I had under there because that's embarrassing. A little bit of a generalization issue sometimes because I don't necessarily have every tool I need. And if you go back to enough videos, you realize I'm supposed to have every tool that I need because I told you that I'd buy the tools that I need before I do the job that I'm supposed to do because prevention is awesome. Right? Because that's kind of what we're going to get at with this one. Out of breath from yanking on stuff that shouldn't be yanked on. Let's see what we got here. So we're talking about how you can reduce behavior or change behavior, get something to happen less frequently. It also applies to getting stuff to happen more frequently, but we can deal with that at another time. But we're going to do it without punishing. Okay, I'm not going to beat the crap out of somebody. I'm not going to yell at them. I'm not going to scream at them. I'm not going to spank them. I'm not going to take away their allowance. I'm not going to take away their video games. I'm not going to take away their phones. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about different types of interventions, different types of things that you can do to reduce or prevent a behavior from happening. So let's back up a little bit. Just start. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? You guys have heard that. Sometimes we'd like to joke around and call this stuff the science of the obvious because a lot of what we talk about is completely obvious to everybody. You're like, well, of course I know that. Well, science is really weird. You don't know it until you know it. You know what I mean? In other words, sorry, I couldn't resist.
I know.
You do know. If you know, then, the point being that science doesn't necessarily know something as a fact until you go through the rigorous scientific procedures to test things. So all these different things that we know are functional, like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We know that, but we don't have the scientific evidence to back it up. Well, we actually do now. So that's my point, is that this may be, a lot of this stuff may just be blatantly obvious, but the entire science behind it is really complicated, and it's taken a long time to get through all these things. But the good news is a lot of those phrases like that they end up being true. You know, that was one of them as an example. So we're going to change behavior. One of the things that we can do is do things before that behavior occurs. We call those antecedent interventions, right? These are things that you can do to get a different behavior to occur or make one not occur, right? Or less likely to occur. So for example, if I was trying to do more exercise, maybe I could buy a nice pair of running shoes and a nice pair of shorts and the different types of things I need in order to be successful with exercise. Maybe I could then put those out in a very strategic spot in my bedroom, maybe by the door or something like that. So I have to trip over my shoes and to remind myself to go ahead and get a little bit of exercise. Those are antecedent interventions. Those are things you do beforehand. There's other things that you can do too. Sometimes people want to stop smoking or stop chewing or reduce their drinking. They say, "Oh, I'm going to change." Well, that kind of works, not as good as you might think. It does count as an antecedent intervention. You're saying those words, but a lot of people just go, "Well," so I would ask people, "Well, what are you going to do to change?" And they'll come up with the answer. They'll say, "I'm just going to I'm going to tell myself not to smoke cigarettes." Well, hold on here. You ready? I'm going to tell myself to do something. Did you catch it? No? You didn't know what I was thinking? Really? I'll be damned. Well, guess what? If you're not making a physical change to the world, we're not going to let it count. Will self-statements, private self-statements like I just did, will they help? I suppose they can. That kind of mixed bag on scientific evidence because it's hard to know if somebody actually made the self-statement. Like, it's impossible to know. You can't know that, like, empirically, meaning with confidence and through observation, we can't know that that self-statement occurred. So we talk about making physical changes to the environment. For Christmas, I got these pair of gloves, and I leave them out here in the shop. And I'll be darned if every time I'm out in the shop and I see these gloves, I put them on. They're effective. They work. My hands are dry. They're not all cut up, and I didn't get them all rusty and covered in gunk from being under there a few minutes ago, right? So when So that's a type of antecedent intervention. Now, I ended up getting reinforced for wearing the gloves, so it maintains, right? So the behavior sticks, right? So antecedent interventions, things that happen before behavior, and we talk about specifically about making physical changes to your world, whatever that may be. Cigarette smoking, you could take the ashtrays out of your house, you could put a picture of your kids on the pack of cigarettes, I don't know, all sorts of different things that you could do that are physical interventions. Oh, let's see, what else do we have? Oh, we could do things like changing the motivation, right? Wow, that sounded weird. So we could change the motivation, right? So we can change things about whether or not that person is likely to engage in that particular behavior. Think about what would happen if you basically start choking somebody. I don't mean in a mean sort of evil sense. I mean in a scientific, we're going to find out what happens if I choke you, right? So go ahead, put somebody in a rear naked choke. No, do not do that, please, all right? The point is that if you deprive people of oxygen, think about what the behavior is going to happen. What is it going to do? You're going to turn myself red. Hold on. You're going to start flip-fluttering and doing all sorts of crazy stuff all over the place, right? That was harder to do than I thought it was. All right, so then you're going to start flapping your arms. You're going to do all sorts of crazy things. You're punching, grabbing, doing all sorts of whatever, and to try to get that oxygen, right? You're going to vary that response. So you're changing the value of things. All of a sudden, air becomes extremely valuable when you've been deprived of it. Food becomes wicked valuable when you've been deprived of it. Sex becomes valuable when you get deprived of it. Doing hobbies and working on cars, for me, if I don't get a chance to do this very often, then it becomes more valuable. I get really excited when I get a time to come out and work on the car because it's been deprived, right? So that's one thing we can do. We can also, so that makes whatever it is, so something, we can deprive something to increase the value of a reinforcer, okay? Then we can also go the other direction. We can flood something. We can give you too much of something, right? And that decreases the value. Let's say you got a kid that's totally tantruming and you seem to think that maybe this thing is about attention. So start giving attention all the time. Don't ignore the kid. I mean, if you've got a kid throwing a tantrum or whatever, or dog throwing a tantrum, that sounds kind of funny, but you get my idea. Maybe the organism is doing something totally crazy that you think they're doing it to get attention. Then maybe you should give attention for everything else. And that problem behavior won't then be motivated by attention because they've already received all the attention they need. It's a highly effective tool. We could get into the term non-contingent reinforcement, but we don't need to go into all the details. The point is that stuff works. Let's see, what else do we have? Non-contingent. Sorry for the technical. I'm checking them off in my head. Motivation. So we can, like I said, we can flood the organism with flood the person, flood yourself with the reinforcers. That way, the problem behavior isn't as valuable, or the reinforcer isn't as valuable for that problem behavior. Now, what this really gets back into is something called the matching law. All right? So I'm not going to get too technical on you, but it's simple. If you have a choice, you're going to make a choice to engage in the behavior that produces the most reinforcers. It's called matching. It is a strongly researched phenomenon. It happens across many species, including humans, and it's very, very robust, meaning that if one behavior is more valuable than another behavior, then you'll probably go with the one that's more valuable. Does it work all the time? No. All right. One of my favorite examples is sex with a condom and sex without a condom. Okay. Sex without a condom is obviously much more enjoyable than sex with a condom. So which one is more likely to occur? Sex without a condom, right? But you have to do something to change the value of that, because if you're having sex all the time without condoms and you have multiple partners, then you're putting yourself in a pretty high risk scenario. So we have to do something to modify the value of that condom. And some of that can be some self-statements, some public things saying, I'm not going to use condoms, I am going to use condoms until we're in a monogamous relationship or married or whatever. I mean, you can make that public. You can always put condoms in your environment. You can work with your partner to make sure that they won't have sex with you if you don't have a condom. You know, those sorts of, there's all sorts of interventions that we can do. So we can tweak the motivations at the end, or something after a behavior, because motivators actually happen after a behavior, which sounds weird, right? They're the consequences for behavior, they're the things you're working for, it's the things that end up with the function, right? The function of behavior, right? That stuff that you're getting, well, eventually that becomes a motivating operation. Those are the things that you're working for, whatever it is. Maybe it's money. So you can tweak those sorts of things after a behavior. You can tweak them. It actually counts as antecedent interventions because what you're doing is modifying the value of those things before the problem behavior occurs. Right? So then we can talk about removing sources of reinforcement from your environment for particular behaviors. If we know what's maintaining a response, then we can remove that sort of that whatever that thing is that's maintaining it from the environment. Back to the attention example. If attention is maintaining whining behavior, then stop providing attention for whining behavior. Provide attention for all other types of behavior, right? And just ignore that particular one. So those are types of things we can do. We can do physical manipulations to the environment. Great options there, right? We've talked about a few examples. I leave some of my tools out from the very last thing I was working on, so I remember what I was working on, and I tend to make notes. If you look carefully on the windscreen, there's notes in the dust about what to do next. What are the things that I've got to do, and I wipe that off over time. So those are antecedent manipulations to get me to engage in appropriate behavior the next time I come into the shop. So remember, prevention. Okay, that's really important. We try to do things to prevent problem responses or prompt appropriate responses. And I don't know what else to tell you that without getting too much like hyper technical on you. So I think that's about it for now. And we'll come back and talk about doing some other stuff to behavior. Surprise, surprise. In a bit. See ya. I don't know why I'm going back to this, but what the hell.